This is 3000 NFL Mock Draft, the Seahawks Draft Podcast, and the overall the NFL Draft Podcast. And we're sitting here on Friday, April 29th, 2016, the end of day 2 of the 2016 NFL Draft, and the Seahawks have made 4 picks. We've got 4 new players on the Seattle Seahawks, including one that they made a jump up about 10 spots to go out and get. And we're here, myself, Kenneth Arthur of fieldgoals.com, and Rob Staten of SeahawksDraftBlog.com, to break down the 4 players and just talk about the guys that are going to be coming to Seattle this year, the guys that they didn't get, but the ones that they decided to bring in. And I'll tell you something, we did not talk about any one of these 4 players extensively, and in some cases, not at all. So thanks for sticking with us these last 9 months as we spent all that time talking about the guys that we thought they'd get, or at least getting in some sort of range, and then the Seahawks doing what they do and just doing their own thing. So, but that doesn't mean they didn't get really good picks, and we're going to talk to Rob right now and find out how good these guys are. Jarran Reed was the second-round pick, defensive tackle out of Alabama. C.J. Prosise, the running back out of Notre Dame. Nick Vannett, the tight end out of Ohio State. And Rees Odhiambo, offensive guard from Boise State. And let's start with Reed. Rob, this was a couple of hours ago that it actually happened, but the Seahawks, they were sitting there. They use a 4th-round pick. They go up. They see Jarran Reed there. This is a guy that I don't think anybody had expected to be there at 49, and the Seahawks had to go out there and they get them. How good of a get do you see Jarran Reed? Would you have given him a first-round grade?
Well, I had him at number 16 overall to Detroit. The big sort of issue with Jarran Reed, and I suspect this is why he has fallen a bit, is that the entire NFL is playing in sub-package these days. You know, they want guys who can play every single down. And a lot of teams are not sort of playing a strong base defense that is essentially trying to take away a run game and then rushing those guys off the field and bringing on a specialist unit. So Jarran Reed's value is somewhat diminished there because comparing him to even someone like Kenny Clark, who went at the end of the first round, has arguably got a better pass rush potential at the next level than someone like Jarran Reed. So he slipped a little bit. I mean, there are some little character things. He had a DUI in 2014. I'm not sure that there was anything overly serious, though, that sent him down the board. But it was fun to see the Seahawks sort of making an aggressive move as early as round 2 to go and get somebody. I think that a lot of the fans who will have last night sort of been a bit frustrated that they moved down from 26 to take Germain Ifedi will probably have been excited by the Jarran Reed move. Here's what he is. He is a guy who, if you throw a double team his way, he just doesn't move. He plants his legs in the ground and he stays where he is. If you watch the Senior Bowl, you can actually go and watch the full Senior Bowl game on YouTube. I would recommend everybody goes and watches the first quarter and the 4th quarter. In the first quarter, you'll see a play where Carson Wentz is forced out of the pocket and he scrambles to the right-hand side and tries to get the first down with his legs, and Jarran Reed chases him down from the defensive tackle position. So it shows how athletic he is. And then in the 4th quarter, you see Jarran Reed 3 plays in a row where he just completely dominates. I think he has a sack, and a tackle for a loss on 4th down. It was just every single, there's 3 plays in succession there. And the guys, and Charles Davis and Mike Mayock were sort of calling the game, and they were sort of laughing at how amusing it was that Jarran Reed had made those plays. This is an Alabama guy, a couple of weeks from winning a national championship, who was at the Senior Bowl, and even though the game was essentially over at that point, was still playing his tail off, to make plays and have an impact there. And he was taught for several weeks as a first-round pick. Daniel Jeremiah said after he was picked that he was the 13th player on his board. I know that Todd McShay constantly petitioned for Jarran Reed going in the top 15. So the fact that he was there I think it was 49, wasn't it, when the Seahawks took him? You just to finish on this little review of Jarran Reed as well, I think that the key thing is here is the Seahawks want to take away the run game. And people might fret about this and say he's not much of a pass rusher. There was other guys there who were better pass rushers, but they want to take away the run game and force the other team into long down and distance. And they signed Chris Clemens to be another edge rusher a few weeks ago. And that really sort of took a bit of the stress away from needing that type of a player. And now they're going to just plug Jarran Reed where Brandon Mebane is. And that should allow them to, I mean, they didn't give up a single 100-yard rushing game last year. And now this gives them a chance to repeat that. So I think that the Jarran Reed pick gets a huge thumbs up because nobody ever expected him to last this long.
And if you were sitting there with Jarran Reed with that being the selection and saying that he's not much of a pass rushing interior defensive lineman, which is so popular these days, and if you're looking around and you say that this defensive line, it's got just a bunch of players. Jarran Reed is guaranteed to make the roster at this point, and that includes, the guys like Vannett and Averill and Atiba Rubin and probably a guy like Jordan Hill, and then there's going to be some competitions, but just on day 3, do you think that it fills the need for anybody that's sort of going to be in that defensive tackle spot or the 3-tech spot? Do you think that this ends their drafting of any defensive tackles, or do you think that it's still something that they could take later on?
No, I think that this is pretty much it now. I mean, there may be some guys later on. I mean, there's Willie Henry still on the board. Andrew Billings is falling apparently because of a knee issue. But there's other guys that they could potentially take. Ronald Blair still on the board. If I'm just going to have a look down the list here and see if there's anybody else who sort of stands out, I'm not sure that there is, to be honest. A lot of the bigger names have gone at this point. I mean, there are some interesting defensive linemen still out there. So you could suggest, for example, Charles Tapper is still available. Hassan Ridgway is still available. So there are one or two sort of the bigger names who are still there. That's pretty much it. Do I think the Seahawks are going to take... I had someone send me a tweet saying they need to get a better interior pass rush. Who's going to provide that? And again, I'll just say what we've said for a few weeks now is that is not what the Seahawks are about. The Seahawks in base defense want bigger bodies. Just think about 2013 when they had Red Bryant at end. They would have Chris Clemens at end. They would have Brandon Mebane and Tony McDaniel. That was their base defense. There was no pass rush in the interior there. What they want to do is they want to force teams to go into 3rd and long with their base defense taking away the run game. They want to make teams one-dimensional, and they want to then release the hounds. They want to get the pass rushers on the field because the team is forced to to throw the football. And then they've got an opportunistic secondary. That is what the Seahawks are on defense. So they weren't going to go and draft some small interior rusher like Sheldon Day and think, well, there you go, there's the answer. They're going to play Jarran Reed, they're going to play Atiba Rubin, they're going to put Jordan Hill in the rotation, they're going to have Michael Bennett and Frank Clark probably rushing from the inside on nickel. That's the Seahawks. No, I don't think they need another defensive tackle. I think they've kind of addressed that need.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's going to be a good one, and you got to be excited about the front 7 there on defense, I think, and they're just going to continue to do the things that Pete Carroll likes to do, which has had pretty good results. So after that, the Seahawks, there was a long break, obviously, because they had traded up, and it would be, it's a typical break because their next pick would be 31 picks later, like you would normally expect, but CJ, we were talking a lot about running backs, and we had gone over probably a dozen of them extensively on this podcast, from Derrick Henry to Paul Perkins to Alex Collins. And, I don't think this has changed, but in the first, 89 picks, maybe there was one more, but I know that up until like pick 85, only 3 running backs had come off the board. And this is just continues to perpetuate the idea that running backs do not have high value. Not to say that this wasn't a weaker running back class, because next year I know that there could be as many as, say, 7 running backs going off in the first 2 rounds. It's a great running back class with Fournette and Chubb and all that kind of stuff. But still, running backs not really going in this draft, and they could have had their pick of pretty much any one of them. And we had talked about it a bunch, but we had not really spent a lot of time on this podcast talking about CJ Prosise, who is the 90th pick for the Seahawks, running back out of Notre Dame, 6 feet, 220 pounds. I had gone into CJ's Twitter account and just started scrolling down looking for tweets and highlights, and I retweeted a few of those. If you want to have the best draft follow and the best overall follow on Twitter, make sure to check me out at Kenneth Arthur S. It's the best Twitter follow, in my humble opinion. And I retweeted some of CJ's runs at Notre Dame. And there is some mini Marshawn in this guy. They're not the same player, but he had ones where he would break 7 tackles, and he had breakaway speed where if he got through, it seemed like nobody could bring him down. And, these are highlights. You're only going to see the highlights, but this is a guy that averaged over 6 yards per carry. I mean, Notre Dame running back, and the only one I can think of for the Seahawks right now would be Julius Jones, which you don't want to really think about, but I do want to think about CJ Prosise and just watching the highlights, and it does give you those wow moments that you sort of had after they drafted Tyler Lockett, and another guy that I didn't personally spend a lot of time with before last year's draft, but then you see the highlights and your jaw drops a little bit, and I don't know what the complete package is with Prosise. So what kind of a running back did they get with Prosise, and why do you think that we didn't spend as much time talking about him on this podcast as opposed to other guys? Like, what were the qualities? There must be some quality about Prosise that made you think that the Seahawks wouldn't be targeting him, and yet here he is. So can you talk about what kind of a running back he is and why maybe he'd flown under our radar?
Well, I think in fairness, we didn't spend a major amount of time talking about running backs. If there are people who are regulars on the blog, they will know that we spent quite a lot of time talking about CJ Prosise, because after the combine, so the reaction to the combine, I might be able to dig one of the articles up and highlight it. If you give me a second, I think that after the thing at the combine was that the Seahawks have generally gone for running backs who are about 5'10" to 6 foot and about 220 pounds. That's kind of, what they do.
Yeah. I'll take the hit on this one. If we didn't bring it up, that's my bad. I'll take the hit. And I didn't see the Prosise articles on SeahawksDraftBlog.com.
Well, I'm just sort of having a look to see what the notes are kind of made, just so I can answer this one properly. But
yeah,
the thing is that they have a sort of an ideal size, athleticism, sort of thing going on here. And Prosise and Kenneth Dixon were, I think, the only two at the combine who matched it. And Dixon's speed was a lot slower. I think Prosise was a 4.4 runner and Dixon was a 4.6. So he was a lot more sudden. So you were looking at this guy, and we did spend quite a bit of time on the blog sort of looking at him and discussing him as an option. I think I mocked him in a 7-rounder to the Seahawks in round 3 or 4 once. I think it was round 4 that I mocked him there. And, there were some qualities that you would think that they'd be interested in. So, he is a tough runner. He's converted position, so he's got no issues with, doing what the coaches ask of him. If you listen to the interviews with CJ Prosise, he's quite personable, intelligent, which is another thing they like. He is a terrific pass catcher out of the backfield. And if the Seahawks are going to roll with Thomas Rawls, predominantly Christian Michael fitting in there, and now they've got another running back, and the new running back can catch passes out the backfield and do all of that stuff, then even better. And, I like the pick. I do like the CJ Prosise pick. I think that it's the type of running back the Seahawks needed. He can, if needed, carry the load. And I think that his best football is to come. He's new to the position of running back. So I think that it's a pick with a lot of potential. And I think that Seahawks fans can feel comfortable about this one, that they're going to get another good player here. That's a good pick.
It's interesting because you look at guys. It would be interesting to take a look at all of the Seahawks draft picks and see how many of them played extensively at another position in college than the one that they necessarily were drafted at, or that the Seahawks had in mind. Just guys that had switched around. We know about all of the linemen. We know about Richard Sherman. We know about so many other guys. And Prosise going from safety to wide receiver to running back. And that kind of versatility, I think the fact that when they get guys that are like, this guy could be this or this guy could be that. When you talk about the drafting of Jarran Reed, a guy who you're saying like, because we know that on the defensive line, they have no problem saying like, maybe this guy is only really great at this thing, and this guy is only really great at this thing. So we'll have this guy on for 2 downs and this guy on for 3 downs. And if you combine the two, you get basically an elite player if you just think of them as combining 2. But that does take a roster spot. That being said, when you have a guy that can do multiple things, when they have certain guys like Tukuafu or whatever, and they're like, well, now we got guys that can do multiple things and it can save us a roster spot. But I do think if you got to go out there and watch some of Prosise's highlights, this is a guy that I think could be really, really good and do, like I say, do one thing or 2 things. If it's going to be catching the ball out of the backfield or maybe even lining up wide sometimes, I think that's a really interesting pick.
Well, can I just, I found the piece I was looking for here. This is the first day of the combine when the running backs were there. And it was a lot of people were talking about Keith Marshall at Georgia because he ran such a blistering 40 time. He ran a 4.31. And I wrote this down here. It said, Marshall ran a 4.31 at 5'10 and 219. That's the good news. The bad news is that he jumped a mediocre 30.5-inch vertical. He's quick, but is he explosive? The Seahawks seem to like lower body power and the ability to be more than just a fast guy. Thomas Rawls had a 35.5-inch vertical. Christian Michael had a 43-inch vertical. So it's not just sort of the speed and the size they're looking for. They want explosion from their running back. So I went on to say that Notre Dame's CJ Prosise ticks a lot of the boxes. He's 6'0", 220 pounds, ran a 4.48 and managed a 35.5-inch vertical. His experience catching the ball could be crucial if they want to make him a 3rd down back. Louisiana Tech's Kenneth Dixon ran an okay-ish 4.58, but did manage a 37.5-inch vertical. Marshall's fantastic speed is intriguing, but Prosise and Dixon are arguably the more explosive, tougher players the Seahawks look for. So, you get kind of caught up in sort of looking at sort of different types of players. I don't think we ever sort of thought that the running back was going to be a high pick, round 1 or round 2. We didn't really look at them. But if we were going to sort of narrow our options down, we really should have focused on Dixon and Prosise as the 2 players that were more likely to take. And the issue with Dixon is he fumbled the ball, I think, something like 13 times in college. So that's probably one of the reasons why he's still on the board.
So yeah, there you go. I mean, look at that. We talked about them at least getting a running back in on SeahawksDraftBlog.com. Rob very clear about why he did tick the boxes for the Seahawks, and here he is now a member of the Seahawks. And then 4 picks after that. I've been curious about the tight end position as far as the draft goes for the Seahawks and thinking whether or not they would do something there. I think that I don't think that this is a Jimmy Graham issue in any sort of way. I think that regardless, if you had said that Jimmy Graham is coming back very healthy, I think that it's still a matter of the fact that the Seahawks like big athletic tight ends no matter what. I think to a certain degree, maybe Pete Carroll and or John Schneider have just an obsession with guys that maybe fill out in ways that very few human beings do fill out. So with the 94th pick overall, the one that they got from the Denver Broncos and trading down for Germain Ifedi, the Seattle Seahawks select Nick Vannett, tight end out of Ohio State, another Buckeye off the board, 6'6", 257 pounds. Of Urban Meyer, he says in his first 2 years he wasn't very good, but in the last 2 years he was phenomenal. He has very good size and he is a good route runner. Didn't get used a lot in the passing game, but I don't think that he necessarily, from what I'm hearing, is necessarily that doesn't mean he's a blocking tight end. It seems to me that this is a guy that would be expected to use in the passing offense and also to help out as having a big body on that offensive line, which is something that they're really going to need. And so this is really a guy that's not just going to push Luke Wilson, but I think is also just going to be, someone's got to get out there. And I don't think that you can say, well, we got to bring back Cooper Helfat. I think that you got to have some competition there and say, this is a team that likes 3 big athletic tight ends. And even still, Jimmy Graham is only signed for 2 more years, non-guaranteed contracts. And it's just, they're going to see how he comes back. So you've got to have more than one tight end. I think another thing that they fear is going out there with Luke Wilson for the whole season or for a half a season. I don't think that you want Luke Wilson, because we've seen that before. You don't necessarily want Luke Wilson to be your number one and then Cooper Helfet or some other guy or a seventh rounder being your number two. So, Rob, I don't know if we ever talked about Nick Vannett on this podcast. Were you shocked by the pick, and how good of a player can he be?
I don't know. I don't know how I'd describe my reaction to this one. I don't think I was necessarily shocked. I think pleasantly surprised, because I don't hate the pick at all. And I didn't expect them to draft a tight end this early, I've got to be honest, because I thought it looked like a really poor tight end class. They've constantly spoken about how positive they are with Jimmy Graham returning. I thought they liked Luke Wilson enough to sort of feel like he may be a guy who gets extended down the line. And if they've sort of liked those two, is a third tight end a priority enough, over some of the other positions there? So I wasn't completely convinced that they were going to go down this road. Plus, with there being so few tight ends who were draftable in this draft, to see someone fall Vannett, I guess you couldn't call it a fall, but last as long as he has when Hunter Henry went at the top of round 2, that gives you a pause moment where you sort of think, well, why is he still available in this range? But then at the same time, you can't help but get excited about something like this because, they have not drafted a tight end this early. They constantly had opportunities to draft tight ends early, like Travis Kelce, for example. They didn't draft him in round 2. They didn't draft Jimmy Graham, funnily enough, in 2010 when they had an opportunity to. They've not taken tight ends, and now they've taken one early, for the first time. So you kind of want to know, what do they see in this guy? Do they see the potential to develop into a bit of a Zach Miller? A lot of people were saying, oh, he's going to be a blocking tight end. That's great. Well, at the same time, Urban Meyer was on the NFL Network, and he was saying that he's a move tight end and he's a precise route runner. He's not. His first impression was not, he is a blocking tight end. In fact, they actually compared him to the guy who went last year, whose name it's got a funky name. It was at Ohio State last year. It was in the draft. He made a point of saying, well, he benched 35 reps on the bench. He's strong. He's a blocking tight end. Nick Vannett's more of a move tight end. So I thought that was interesting. A player, I have to admit, have not spent anywhere near as much time looking at, because I didn't expect that they were going to go down this road. And he's going to, this is the fun thing about the draft, though. If the guys you don't cover as much as you, in hindsight, should have done, you get to now go back and have a good look at. So we can spend a lot of time looking at Nick Vannett, sort of breaking him down, seeing what he's going to bring to the Seahawks. So I think it's a fun pick, an interesting one, but a little bit surprising. I did expect them at this pick to go O-line again, and I thought, we'll come on to that in a minute. But if they didn't go O-line, I thought they were going to take a linebacker hybrid, because at the moment, that position that's accommodated by Bruce Irvin it's Mike Morgan's or Cassius Marsh's. It's not, it's a position where you would have thought they could get a bit of extra depth there. And I kind of imagined that someone like Jeremy Cash or Miles Killebrew or somebody like that, it was a bit of a hybrid, could offer some good value in this range. And so it was a bit surprising to see them go this way instead. However, just to finish, Kenny, on Vannett, look at the first few picks. Big, enormous tackle who looks like the Hulk. You've got big, strong, immovable object nose tackle in round 2. You then take a running back with size who's 6 foot and 220 pounds. And then you go and take a tight end who's 6'6" and 257 pounds. There was a theme to all of these picks. Seattle wanted size, they wanted an edge, they wanted toughness, they wanted proven ability, and that's what they went for.
Well, yeah, and I'm wondering too, because it's interesting because you talk about surprises and not thinking about Nick Vannett and how it's nice to maybe get a new sort of project to spend the next few days looking into. And conversely, Germain Ifedi was the pick across the board for everyone, and had spent so much time talking about him and saying why he was the likely pick. But then you get a surprise. And you talked about whether or not you expected them to go for a linebacker or some type of hybrid and something to fill in the Bruce Irvin. Do you think that if because they're at 90 where they took Prosise. I think it was just maybe 2 or 3 picks earlier that the Green Bay Packers select Kyler Fackrell, and you had talked a lot about Fackrell on the blog as well. Do you think that if Fackrell hadn't been drafted, that maybe that would have changed their they would have changed their plan at all? Or do you think that the sort of, because they're going to take the best player, do you think that that would have changed at all their thoughts?
Well, possibly. I mean, I did like Kyler Fackrell, and if he was still on the board, he may have been an option for them. But I mean, we're going to find out whether they would have been seriously interested in him over the next couple of the next day. Now there's only 1 day left, so we're going to find out tomorrow how serious they feel they need to add a Sam linebacker or somebody who can play safety or linebacker. We'll find out about that. There was a lot of athletic safeties in this class, and they didn't take them, and they've not taken anybody who can play in that role. So it might just not be a priority for them. They might feel that Frank Clark can spell that. They might just start Mike Morgan in base, take him off the field, and put Frank Clark and Chris Clemens on to be sort of specialist pass rushers. They might be quite comfortable with that. And they might sort of feel like, well, you know what, it's a specialist role going forward. They also might have just felt they had more important needs. And if Jimmy Graham is going to miss time, then Nick Vannett might just be a more important need. And they definitely needed to add another running back. So, I mean, I think you can make a case for saying this is an absolutely fantastic haul for the Seahawks. And the only one that leaves me personally scratching my head is the final pick, Kenny. That's the only one that is a little bit confusing. Not surprising, because Tony Pauline has been saying for weeks that Rees Odhiambo, I think it's pronounced.
Well, let me announce that here to go over what had happened there at pick 97. We spent so much time talking again about offensive linemen and talking about the size and explosiveness and the marks that the Seahawks look for. And the Seahawks, as good as any team, had gotten a close look at Rees Odhiambo. I'm seeing here this tweet from Rand Getlin on April 5th. Rees Odhiambo is a guy to keep tabs on. The Seahawks, Dolphins, Steelers, and Bears all sent offensive line coaches to his pro day. And then it goes on to say Odhiambo is a deep, deep sleeper with the potential to be an undrafted free agent pickup. CBSSports.com has him ranked as the 13th best guard in the draft, but has him going in the 6th round. According to draft experts, Odhiambo exactly the high upside type of player that the Seahawks like to develop. He's got great size at 6'4", 314 pounds. However, injury concerns have plagued him throughout his college career, the final injury being a broken ankle to end his career 5 games short, but he was still an All-Mountain West honoree in his final 2 seasons. So this is a guy that hails from Kenya, and he didn't start playing football until high school. And so there's not a lot of, there's still a lot to develop there. And here's a guy that is 6'4", 314 pounds out of Boise State. But I can't really find a confirmation here if this comes from his actual pro day, but it seems like he had a broad jump under 8 feet and a vertical, according to NFL.com, of 27 inches, as the broad jump was 7 feet 9 inches, the short shuttle in 4.64, 33 and a quarter inch arm length and under 10 inch on the hands. And it doesn't seem to line up with the size and strength and speed. I don't know if he did everything at his things, but if he was projected to go in round 6, here he goes at the end of round 3. You talked about being shocked maybe with this or maybe confused with Odhiambo. Can you sort of break down the 3 or 5 things that are confusing about this pick?
The first thing is the injuries. He's not finished a full season of football in his career. Pete Carroll said at the end of the season that one of the big priorities is to get healthier on the offensive line. As good as this player might be, and I've not spent as much time watching him as some of the other offensive linemen in this class, as good as he may well be, it comes with a major risk that if he can't stay healthy, then it's a waste of time. So that would be my first concern. I'm a little bit. I know it's been suggested that his workout was impacted by the fact he was not healthy. So if he was not 100% healthy, maybe he is a better tester than the results at his pro day suggests. But this was the thing. I mean, we never said when we put the formula out there. I think we made it quite clear that if there was going to be an outlier pick, it'd be interesting to sort of work out why. What is it about Rees Odhiambo that makes them think it doesn't matter that he hasn't tested as well as the guys we've taken in the last few years? What is it about him that they like? And trying to discover that now is going to be an interesting thing, because maybe he's just the toughest guy in the draft for all we know. And maybe that's what they think it's more important than an athletic profile in this instant, that they're willing to take an outlier for that. But because Conor McGovern was still there, and Conor McGovern is the second most explosive offensive lineman in the class in terms of his physical profile, because Joe Dahl is still there, because Joe Haig is still there, because Hal Vaitai is still there, it is a little bit surprising. So there has to be something about this guy that they just absolutely love, whether it's his attitude, his style of play, his potential. He can test better maybe when he's 100%. There has to be something that's made them think we're going to take the risk here. You do have to give them the benefit of the doubt. That has to be said. And if there are any Seahawks fans sort of getting angry about a third-round compensatory pick at the end of day 2, I would sort of just back up a little bit there. You've got to give these guys the benefit of the doubt. Look at what they have done, in particular in the third round, and getting a franchise quarterback in this round. So if Odhiambo comes in and only ever ends up in his career being a backup, it's still a third-round compensatory pick. It's not a big deal. If the first 4 picks that Seattle made end up being really good, then that's a good draft. In a common draft, getting 3 contributors is a good, successful draft.
Yeah.
If they may well draft someone in the 5th round this year, like they did with Richard Sherman, who goes on to be an absolute legend. So, this pick is not going to make the draft.
No, it's just like exactly the thing is that people need to understand that it's a draft class. You judge a draft class. You don't judge necessarily, whether or not you hit a home run in the first and that's it. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you're pulling in players. The Seahawks in 2011, they come away with James Carpenter in the first and John Moffitt in the 3rd or whatever. But they get Richard Sherman in the 5th. And that's the point, is that they came away with Richard Sherman. And they looked at Richard Sherman. They knew exactly what they wanted in a cornerback. And they said, this guy is going to be a stud. And nobody knows it because nobody else knows what we know about the best way to play our brand of cornerback, and the fact that we want a guy that's exactly this size, exactly this speed, that knows what to do, that takes direction well, that is competitive. They looked at everything in Richard Sherman. They said they're dumb because they don't know that he's getting a 5th round grade or whatever because he was a wide receiver. So it's all about the class. And the Seahawks, they would come away from the 2015 draft and say, maybe Tyler Lockett is a better pick than Frank Clark. It looks like it certainly is going to be that way, but who cares? It's not about the order that you get him in. Mark Lewinsky is going to be better than Terry Poole or whatever. So overall, you got to judge the whole class, though I still don't necessarily know where Odhiambo fits in right now. So how exactly would he fit in? He's gonna probably be a guard, right? And it seems like that. Does he have a chance of competing for a spot this year?
Well, the talk at the start of the day was that Pete Carroll said they were trying to get 4 starters today. So I think that look, they want competition on the O-line. That's absolutely clear. They want guys who are going to compete to start immediately. So he's going to go in there. It certainly sounds like Germain Ifedi is going to stay on the right side of the line. So if he's at right tackle, Webb will compete, you would imagine, at left guard. Glowinski at right guard, unless they want to move Glowinski to the left side. And then Odhiambo, is just going to compete with those guys, unless they believe that he can actually play centre, which has not been suggested yet. I've not seen any of the press conference, anything with Tom Cable where he may have suggested that. That's the other head-scratching thing, is that we sort of sit here tonight and unless they believe Odhiambo is a centre, they have not addressed that position at all. So which suggests that either they just believe in Patrick Lewis, or they're happy to roll with Patrick Lewis for another year, or they like Christian Sakoli or Will Perajak. Unless they feel that there's an option there, they have not addressed that position. Just two quick other thoughts on this. McGovern and Dahl and Haig are still on the board, and even though the Seahawks now don't have a 4th round pick, they might acquire one. And who's to suggest, it's been a bit of a crazy draft. I mean, who thought that Jarran Reed was going to be there for the Seahawks at all anyway in round 2? One of those guys, McGovern, might be there in round 5 for all we know. It's very unpredictable this year. So if they end up getting McGovern 2 rounds later, everyone's going to be like, well, yeah, fair enough, whatever. Just swap Odhiambo with McGovern if it makes you feel satisfied. Pretend one's the 3rd rounder and one's the 5th rounder. And the other thing I would say is that if they had taken Connor McGovern, and only because we talked about him, Kenny, and we've said that he's this athletic profile and he's that, it'd only be based on that. If they had taken McGovern in round 3, everyone would be saying what a fantastic 2 days of the draft, that the Seahawks absolutely nailed it. They got everything right. They've absolutely destroyed the draft. This is the best draft class since 2012. That's what people would have been saying. I think the fact that the Odhiambo pick has kind of caught people off guard a little bit is going to give them a negative impression of the draft. I think that I'm going to give them the. Of course, you're going to give them the benefit of the doubt on this one. You're going to say, look, let's see how it plays out. When you look at the other guys, Ifedi, Reed, Prosise, and then Vannett, you've got to give it a huge thumbs up.
And I think that, I think everyone is entitled to their opinion. That's what you get that right, when you were born, and then you have an opinion, and I can think your opinion out there in general. I'm speaking in generalities, not to you, Rob. I can think that your opinion is stupid, and I can take away said opinion, and I can have an opinion. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if your opinion is about this draft class. You can have one. You can think negatively or positively about the players that the Seahawks have drafted right now, but it doesn't fucking matter. It's dumb. People hated the Russell Wilson pick. Not everyone. A lot of people loved it, but I'm saying some people hated it. And you would have looked at it and you said they didn't address their needs. They had Matt Flynn already. Why did you draft a quarterback in the 3rd round? Oh, my God, what a waste. And you could look at the Rees Odhiambo, or you can compare it to Connor McGovern. As far as I know, Connor McGovern will never make an NFL team, and Odhiambo will be a Pro Bowler because he was all of a sudden he was gonna be healthy. So you can have an opinion, but just know out there that I don't care what it is, because it doesn't matter until after we actually see these guys play. These things change on a dime. They flip immediately. We knew, after one season that Tyler Lockett should have been a 1st round pick at wide receiver and was much better than a lot of the guys that had been rated above him for so long. And we knew right away, that certain players in any draft, it's not going to even take that long. So I would urge everyone out there to just have some patience. So that's the end of day 2 as far as the Seahawks picking up 4 more players. And as you said, they don't have a 4th round pick. I think it'll be difficult for them to pick up one. They don't have a 4th round pick. They don't have their 5th round pick because of the Kelsey McCray trade, but they do have a comp 5th round pick. They don't have a 6th round pick, but they do have a 6th comp round pick. They have a 7th round pick from the Cowboys in the Christian Michael deal, and they also have Christian Michael, by the way, and then they have their own 7th round pick. But they can't trade the 5th or the 6th because they're comp picks, which means if they wanted to get in the 4th round this year, they'd probably have to trade a 3rd rounder from next year. And if they wanted to get into the 5th round this year, they probably have to trade a 4th rounder from next year. So it would be at a cost for them to get in there and up again. But so if nothing happens short of that, the Seahawks aren't going to pick for quite a while. It's going to be about 70 or so more picks until the Seahawks are on the clock. So it's going to be difficult, Rob, to project which players are still on the board by then. And you've mentioned some of the guys that obviously you like. And it was interesting because, as we said, Dahl and Haig and Vitae, and they were all there. And they didn't take those guys. They took Rees. But of the best available players, 5, 6, and 7 and 7 is what they have left. Anybody else that you want to mention, saying like, well, maybe they could get this, or that these are the guys that I like.
Yeah, I mean, you could look at this in two ways as well, because one, there's a lot of good players still on the board. So when they get to round 5, there's still going to be some nice options there. But two, you'd love to have a couple of picks before they actually pick again. They don't have their 4th or 5th round picks. They just have that 5th comp pick. So it's a long way. So let's go through the different positions. A quarterback, Connor Cook's still there. He's sinking like a stone, not a big surprise. But in terms of the Seahawks, Dak Prescott could be someone they look at to bring in and sort of develop behind Russell Wilson. Cardale Jones is still on the board. He could be an option for that as well. Kevin Hogan's still there. Jeff Driscoll. So you've got some options there for a backup quarterback. So it wouldn't be a total shock if Seattle took one of them in day 3. At running back, there's a whole host of big names, whether it's Jordan Howard, Devontae Booker, Kenneth Dixon, Paul Perkins, Jonathan Williams, Alex Collins, Tyler Irvin still there. There are a whole bunch of running backs that you would imagine are going to get drafted at some point. At receiver, no one's picking Jerome Peak. That must be because his hands are a bit inconsistent. Daniel Braverman's a guy that a lot of people have been talking about. Kenny Lawler's still there. Devin Kajust is still there. Jay Lee. Moritz Boehringer, nobody's taken the big German yet. Just looking through.
I think I'd be loved and interested to see some Boehringer in there.
Yeah, he's still on the board. So there were some really, really, I would say, surprising picks in round 3 in particular. Guys going off the board a lot earlier than you'd expect compared to others. At tight end, there's still 1 or 2 tight ends that might be interesting. I think that the Seahawks are probably going to leave that position now. They've taken Nick Vannett. O-line, we've talked at depth about the guys. Joe Dahl's still there. Connor McGovern's still there. Joe Haig's still there. Hal Vaitai still there. Now, just a quick word on that to qualify. Some people ranked Connor McGovern in round 2 and round 3. I sort of graded him tentatively in round 2 and round 3 just because Mitch Morse went in that range. But I've seen other people sticks around into round 5. There's still a chance that the Seahawks could land him. There might actually be some method to this. He might be available a lot later than people expect. Same for the other 3, I guess. But there's still some nice options there. And if they're going to deviate away from, Tef and trench explosion and all that, Christian Westerman's still there. He's a very powerful athletic guard. You've got Sebastian Tretola, arms are very short. Can't see that. Evan Boehm's there, though, a centre prospect that they might look at day 3 who could compete. I've just got a feeling they're going to bring a centre in, even if it's just somebody to compete there. But, Evan Boehm can only play centre. So if they're going to bring somebody in as a centre and he doesn't win the job, he can't play anywhere else. So it kind of, I don't know, it's still a bit of an odd one that they haven't brought any centre. Maybe they really are going to give Christian Sicoli a chance here. At D-line, Charles Tapp, we mentioned, is still there. Ronald Blair, Hassan Ridgway, Andrew Billings, Willie Henry's going to provide great value for somebody on day 3. Alex McAllister might be a free agent to look at. DJ Reed as a nose tackle could be a nice pick for somebody on day 3. Joel Heath would be a D-line to O-line convert. Someone to keep an eye on day 3 for the Seahawks. Joel Heath could certainly be a guy to look at. And then there's Alex Balducci from Oregon, who is a bit of a sleeper on the D-line, someone that the Seahawks have shown interest in at the Shrine Game. So there's him. Josh Perry. I'm surprised that Joshua Perry has not been selected at all. The Ohio State inside linebacker. Cannot believe that he's still on the board. Travis Feeney is still on the board. If they want to add he's some, I talked about them adding a linebacker. He could, if the injury situation pushes him into sort of round 6, round 7, he could be a really nice pick for the Seahawks, or even as a free agent if it's that bad. Travis Feeney, someone to keep an eye on tomorrow. At cornerback, they do like to take corners. So let's have a look, see if there's any left. Rashard Robinson is very, very painfully thin, but has got the arm length they look for. DeAndre Hall has got the arm length they look for. Eric Murray has from Minnesota. I think that's pretty much it. Kevon Seymour, they visited with him. He's still there. So there's still a few options for them at corner. DeAndre Elliott, of course, we've talked about. He's someone that they could look at there. And then at safety, just to finish, Miles Killebrew still on the board. So I don't think they're going to get him now. I can't see him lasting until the late 5th round. and ditto Jeremy Cash, who was a really fun player to watch. Not great in coverage, but really, really solid up front. Can't see either of those two guys lasting until the 5th round. So maybe that will limit their ability to do anything there. But there are some other safeties they could look at. Someone like DJ Marshall, for the guy at Marshall, DJ Hunter, is someone they could look at later on or in free agency.
And right here on 3000 NFL Mock Draft, end of day 2, just really quickly, because we've been talking about some of these guys a lot, I just wanted to sort of wrap up a few of the guys that we had been talking about and where they went, because it is of interest. And I'll just say quickly, sometimes I'll have an opinion on that. And like I said before, you can just think my opinion is shit, and you can just ignore it. The Cowboys, Jalen Smith falls out of the second, goes to the Cowboys at 34. I don't like that pick for the Cowboys. I thought that they needed to address their defense now, and they didn't do that in either the first or the second round. The Jaguars getting Miles Jack, I think that's a great move for them, because if Miles Jack only has 4 years, they're the team that really needs to get good now, and they add 4 or 5 great players to that defense next year. They're going to win the AFC South maybe. And then just some more that came off. Noah Spence, we'd been talking about. He goes to the Bucs at 39, and it's just the Bucs making all these risky picks with Vernon Hargreaves and Noah Spence, and then a kicker later in the second round. So I think the Bucs are having perhaps the worst draft so far, I want to say, and that's converse to the draft that they had last year, which was so good. And I really question their Bucs moves this year. But maybe Spence, it could also pay off. But combining it with their other 2 first 3 picks, it just seems not good. The Bills taking Reggie Ragland, I liked that pick a lot, especially for them. I think going into Rex Ryan's defense, Rex Ryan is the perfect guy for them. Jihad Ward going to the Raiders had been talked about as a first-round pick, and I think Oakland's doing so many good things that's interesting. Derrick Henry to the Titans, so he's not going to have a lot of pressure on him to produce. He's going to be paired up with DeMarco Murray and Marcus Mariota. That's a 3-headed rushing attack. So a good move for him. As you talked about, Ashawn Robinson falling to 46 to the Lions, a bad pick. Michael Thomas to the Saints, might be a decent player, but a bad pick again for the Saints. Jason Spriggs going to the Packers after that. The Colts trading up for him. The Packers trading up for him. And with the Colts, and Jason Spriggs being the athletic offensive lineman that the Seahawks did not choose in favor of Germain Ifedi. Nick Martin, who I'd been the first guy that I'd locked you in, Rob, I think that's the guy that you're going to lock in for the Seahawks, but he falls all the way to 50, and he goes to the Texans, who traded up for him. And Tyler Boyd going to the Bengals to be their next wide receiver. And then moving quickly now into the 3rd round, and some of the picks from the 3rd round that we had talked a lot about on this podcast, being Bronson Kafusi going to the Ravens at 70. The Bears take Jonathan Bullard at 72. Going on, Shalik Calhoun to the Raiders at 75. And then a pick later, the Browns with one of the picks that they had gotten from the Titans from the Rams, Sean Coleman, a guy who I wrote about this week and did an extensive interview with like 5 or 6 people for Sean Coleman, the cancer survivor, that I think really fits in as a Pete Carroll type guy and would have been a great pick for Seattle, but maybe he just didn't fall far enough, whether or not they were in on him or not. But he goes to the Browns, so I think a good pick for them. And LaRaven Clark going to the Colts at 82. The Kendall Fuller going to the Redskins, not surprising. Braxton Miller going to the Texans. Kyler Fackrell, like I said, going to the Packers. And then that's pretty much it as far as some of the guys that we had talked about extensively. And just last question, Rob, of those names or maybe another name, did you have a favorite and a least favorite pick from day 2?
Let me have a quick look. I mean, there was nothing sort of that really stood out. And I mean, I like the value of some of the picks, but then, I think it's really sort of tough to judge because, I could easily just say, well, wow, someone got Jonathan Bullard in round 3, and Chicago have done a good job drafting since they changed GMs. I could say that was a great pick for them, but why was he available after Malik Collins? Why was he taken with the 72 pick by the Bears? Why did he last that long? So, that's the kind of question that I would have to ask, which would sort of put a little asterisk on how impressed I was with that pick. I think that the Browns got some decent value. It's worth taking a risk on Emmanuel Ogbah with the first pick of round 2. I think the Jaguars, obviously everybody was raving about the Jaguars bringing Miles Jack in as well as Jalen Ramsey. So you've got to give them a bit of credit there. I don't think there's any of all the teams. Sort of you put the first and the second round pick together. I don't think anybody did as good a job as Seattle in addressing their needs with Germain Ifedi and Jarran Reed. I mean, that's just a perfect start for the Seahawks there.
Could you defend or make an argument for the Bucks taking the kicker in the second round? Because to me, it's just so stupid.
I just think I just can't believe it. I mean, listen, he is the most prolific kicker, accurate kicker from inside 40 yards. Well, congratulations. You know what happened? His record from 40 plus yards is not very good, and that's where the kickers make their money. You need to if you need to nail a field goal from 55 yards out to win a game. Is he going to be able to do it? Because not every kick's going to be inside the 40. So, he's not going to a dome either. He's going to Tampa Bay. I've been to Florida. It rains a lot. So, it's not like he's going into a dome where it's going to be easier for him. So that's a test for him. That's the kind of pick that can make you look pretty dumb down the line because you took this guy in round 2. I couldn't believe that Adam Gotsis went at the end of the second round. I mean, Denver must just see some Derek Wolfe in him or whatever. But to see him go before some of the other defensive tackles was pretty out there.
Cody Kessler to the Browns.
Yeah, actually, that's the thing. I was going to read a review of the pick, which I'm not sure I totally agree with it, but I thought it was quite humorous. If you just give me 2 seconds, I will find it.
I'm going to give Rob a couple seconds here to find this review of Cody Kessler to the Browns. And it was interesting because Connor Cook is still there, and it is reminiscent of Kirk Cousins because he's also Michigan State, and he fell to the 4th round. And if you can go back, you can see Michigan State players tweeting out their disdain and how they couldn't believe that Russell Wilson would get drafted on day 2, but not Kirk Cousins. And obviously I think that both have done well for themselves, but clearly it was okay. And now you have Jacoby Brissett going to the Patriots and Cody Kessler going to the Browns and Connor Cook still available.
I've got the review here. It says the Browns told Robert Griffin that he'd have to compete with a young quarterback. The only way he'll ever lose to Cody Kessler is if he shows up both drunk and high to practice every day, and even then, it'll be close. So, I don't know. I'm a Browns fan right now. I'm just thinking all you've done is look at the stat sheet and say who had the most sacks, who had the most catches, who had the most whatever, and we'll take them. So, that's the Browns. Just to sort of finish the Seahawks because it's 5 o'clock in the morning again. Yeah. Just to finish quickly, I thought it was kind of just real coincidence that Nick Vannett is on his Instagram page is sat in a Mariners shirt in a Mariners jersey in one of his photos, and Jarran Reed put an Instagram photo of him sort of sat in a Seahawks t-shirt and cap. So why? They have absolutely zero connection to Seattle,
and yet they were both. With Prosise, I mean, he's signed to Rock Nation. That's his agency with Jay-Z. And Jay-Z's one of his, I don't know who all of Jay-Z's Rock Nation clients are, but one of them, the most high profile perhaps being, in baseball, Robinson Cano, who signed a $300 million deal with the Seattle Mariners. So then you had Robinson Cano congratulating Prosise for signing with Rock Nation back like a month ago. So there's another connection.
It's pretty weird. The other thing I want to say, and I'm going to finish with this, is I went to a press conference today involving one of the local English soccer teams. It's a team called Sheffield Wednesday. Yes, they're named after the day Wednesday. So they're called Sheffield Wednesday. They could be in the Premier League next year. And I walked into the room and sat down and looked up, and the cameraman from one of the local TV stations was wearing a Seahawks hoodie. And I said to him, did you stay up last night? And he went, yeah, I did. I stayed up till 5 o'clock in the morning to see the draft. I just found that so amusing that, you know, this is this is a sort of a great review of the growing popularity of the sport, but also the Seahawks, that I just walked into the room and there's a completely random guy stood there in a Seahawks hoodie who'd also spent the whole night awake watching the draft and looked almost as tired as I did yesterday. He probably doesn't have a 2-year-old that woke him up. But yeah, I just found that really strange, especially the day after the draft has started as well.
Yeah, well, you know, Rob, here this is it. You know, I asked you last night if it was worth it to go through all this kind of thing, but this is the end for you. I mean, as far as these 2 days a year, because tomorrow, day 3, it actually does take place during the day in the U.S. anyway, and the Seahawks have 4 picks towards the end of it and all that kind of good stuff. So, Rob, you're just going to have a normal day perhaps and not have to be as tied to what's going on. And we're going to come back on 3000 NFL Mock Draft next week to do a full recap of the Seahawks draft. I know that there probably will be an episode of Real in the Field Goals perhaps tomorrow with myself and Danny Kelly talking about that as well. So you're going to have to, everybody, look out for that as we sort of talk about everything after the end of round 7, and then myself and Rob coming back next week to recap the next 4 players. Plus, they're going to have undrafted free agents, and as we've seen with Thomas Rawls and as we've seen with Doug Baldwin, sometimes their undrafted free agents can be better than every player that they drafted. So it's always going to be interesting, and I think there's going to be some really good names on the undrafted free agent market, especially with the way that John Schneider talked about how deep this class is compared to his previous 6 classes. I think there's probably going to be at least one name that you see them push hard for in undrafted free agency, guys that they don't expect to get drafted that they're going to really like. So we'll come back next week to talk about all of that. And, you know, it's been a nice long little marathon here for days 1 and 2, and appreciate everyone for tuning in to 3000 NFL Mock Draft, and come back next week for the next draft.